Minister Balakrishnan, thank you so much for speaking with us as part of CNA's Leadership Summit. I'm speaking to you primarily, although hopefully not exclusively, as Minister in charge of the Smart Nation initiative. So I'll use that as the excuse for my first question. So you've been Minister in charge of the Smart Nation initiative for about 6 years now.
Yes, almost.
So if you were to go back 2014 and look at where we were maybe just before COVID hit us, let's say January 2020, how much would you say Singapore evolved as a smarter nation between 2014 and the beginning of 2020?
Well, I guess my first point would be to say that fortunately, our broadband network was in place. Fiber to every home, fiber to every office. Second, that we had decided, particularly in the last 6 years, to recruit talent, engineering talent, not only back to Singapore, but also within the civil service. Third, that we have been focused and even concerned about digital inclusion for several years. So if you think about these three factors, the infrastructure, the talent, and digital inclusion, fortunately, it was already in place by the time COVID broke out. Because can you imagine, how would we have been able to work from home? Home-based learning in schools. How would we have been able to do things like distributing masks, providing information, the government communication channels, the use of WhatsApp, if we didn't already have pervasive broadband and wireless connectivity, or even wireless at SG, for instance? We were, in a sense, much more prepared than many other places had been. The other dimension to it is that SARS 17 years ago was also another preparatory event. And that also meant that our healthcare systems, our contact tracing teams, our precautions in hospital had been worked out, and in a sense it was a matter of flipping the switch. So we were very fortunate.
But I would imagine that we would have seen some gaps as well, because it came so fast, it came so quickly. Even things like contact tracing in the initial stages, it was kind of manual. What kind of accelerated steps then were we able to take in those few months to get us to where we are now?
You know, you can plan all you like, but you only really know when you're knee-deep in the crisis. So yes, of course there were gaps exposed, but because we were already on a high base, we were able to overcome it. So let's take a few examples. I think dissemination of information, accurate, timely, credible information, has always been a challenge. Now that we live in a hyper-connected world, in fact, the issue was not just publicizing accurate information, but also dealing with the fact that there are so many competing narratives, so many alternative sources,
especially early in
information.
The episode. Yes.
And all kinds of rumors, misinformation, anxieties, were circulating around. So in a sense, getting above that babble noise was a challenge. Another example, and you mentioned contact tracing being a manual activity. It has always been manual, and even today, I would still view it as a professional human endeavor, but catalyzed or accelerated or enabled by digital tools. But you see, even in the early stages, the normal and natural human anxieties about privacy all came to the fore. And the fact that we were using digital methods and really breaking new ground using these new digital tools, quite understandably also raised anxieties over privacy, over pervasive Big Brother tracking. And it illustrated that we need to explain, re-explain, reassure. And I think what was helpful in our case was that we were able to do so in an open and timely fashion. So for instance, that our contact tracing tools, both software and hardware, were open sourced. We allowed people to come, take a look, kick the tires, check that it was indeed what we said it was. This crisis has enabled us to accelerate to do things which we wanted to, but perhaps in the past when there's less of a sense of urgency, less of a sense of crisis, you don't get on to it with the same speed and alacrity which we have. So my overall take now, 9-10 months post-crisis, is number one, we were prepared. Number two, there were gaps, but we were able to respond to the gaps. And number three, now we have to start thinking the new normal. What has changed permanently? What are the short-term changes? And which parts of the old we got to maintain and in fact reaffirm?
One of the things which underpin any smart nation obviously is data.
Yes.
And one of the most important aspects of dealing with COVID is that as you put
Yes.
more and more data in the hands of government and its partners, even more so now you've got to build that trust
Yes.
with the people, because after
Yes.
all, you can't digitalize trust at the end of the
Yes,
day.
absolutely right.
So what has COVID, you think, taught you, or at least made you realize, or was it something that maybe the government has known all along in terms of the importance of that trust in building the smart nation?
We've always known that trust is absolutely essential. In fact, it is what I would say the not-so-secret ingredient, the Singapore success. That reputation for competence, for trust, for integrity, for openness, in fact, enables us to do so many things faster. And equally important in this crisis, you need public trust, because without that trust, you're not going to get full compliance. And without full compliance, many of the scientifically and correct things to do can't be executed. So you're absolutely right. You remember we had some problems with data leaks, with data penetration of our networks the last 1-2 years or so. But the fact that we dived deeply into the causes, we sorted out what we needed to do, in fact are still doing in order to strengthen our networks, and that we did so in an open way. Where we were at fault, we just said, yes, this was a failing. The fact that we did all that also put us in good stead. Now, in a crisis when, yes, we are in fact collecting more data than we would otherwise do, but at least to have the confidence that questions of encryption, data security, network security, rules of accountability, what you can share, what you can't share, that all those frameworks have been thought of and that we're implementing, and we're working according to those rules. That's very helpful.
It's a matter of not just trust between government and the people. Obviously, that's very significant, but the private sector has a big role to play as well.
Yes. Yes.
Where do you think the last couple of months, the 8, 9 months, 10 months have shown you in terms of the level of integration between government, the business, and the people? Because you need that whole ecosystem to be successful. How different are we from, let's say, January as well?
I think we're in a much better place. Again, if you just think about the last few months, the circuit breaker, government support for companies, the arrangements for people to work from home, all that would not have been possible if this was just a government effort. The fact is that every single private company, corporation, both the MNCs, the locals, the big ones, and the SMEs, all played their role and made sure people got paid, work got done, and especially when you're working from home, this question of trust between employer, employee.
Oh, exactly, yeah.
Trust between supplier and the companies upstream and downstream of your services and products became even more important. My own sense is that we were helped by the fact that actually generally Singapore is a high trust and ecosystem.
I want to transition a little bit, because one of the obviously currencies that's needed in the smart nation obviously is trust, as we are suggesting. One more is also people, as you were talking about.
Yes.
Singapore has managed to build that up over the years up till this crisis. You've also spoken about recently transitioning people not just to digital consumers, what digital produces
Yes.
in the next phase of our development. Explain a little bit what that means.
Well, in fact, if you take a step back from that, we have been a hub, Singapore. If you look back 2-3 centuries, hub for spices, silks, the old maritime Silk Road. Then you fast forward to, say, 40, 50 years, containers, containerization, and of course the fact that we also attracted MNCs to industrialize, invest, build factories. And again, we were now a hub for the new industrial economy. But if you move forward to where the future is, it's not enough for us to just be consumers, because ultimately our market is small. In order for Singapore to find that niche for the future, we do need to be able to make, to create, to innovate, to synthesize, or in digital speak, they will say to mash. The individual components may be open source, may be commoditized, but it's the way you mesh your services together. Therein lies the future. You look at what's happening in our job market right now. Of course, because of the crisis, there is pressure, unemployment is rising. But yet, if you look even in the depths of this crisis, there were sectors of our economy that were short of workers. And there are current sectors which, because of the transformation, which is now being accelerated by COVID, in order to get that restructuring done, we need people with skills. If I think about within the government itself, and as I said, we started recruiting engineers in a big way 6 years ago. If we didn't have those engineers, we would not have been able to spin out the apps that we generated: Safe Entry, Trace Together, Mask Go Where, Token Go Where, the Telegram, the WhatsApp channels, and all that. That requires people with the ability to create, to make, to fix, to find new insights and offer new services. So this is, I believe, crucial for our future. When I look at the internet and I look at what our kids are doing on it, the biggest thing on the internet in terms of revenues actually is games. In fact, the gaming industry is bigger than the movie industry. Well, we want to do more than just watch movies or be movie distributors. We want to be more than just gamers or distributing games, although that's still a very big part of the overall game. But we need to get people who can make those games, improve those games, repackage, re-synthesize new value propositions.
If I could just change direction a little bit now and talk about the business of government, and especially now government in a post-COVID normal. How do you think it's changed, the business of government and especially digital government?
Number one, the pace. You may be working from home or you may be having a circuit breaker. The volume, the pace of work has increased, not decreased. That's the first thing. Second thing is that our people's expectations have also risen. And they expect government services to be as accessible, as understandable, as responsive as with any other private company. And the third thing is that we've had to do far more integration than ever before. It shouldn't be that the citizen has to figure which ministry, which department, or which form you need to fill. You need a system to help you navigate through that. So this point of integration of government services has also become even more crucial. A related point which we must never forget is on the inclusion side of it. That since we are working from home and more is being done digitally, you have to make sure that nobody is left out, either because they don't have the broadband or they don't have the devices or they're just not familiar. So this whole thing of having digital ambassadors, digital offices set up in the communities, making sure everyone has access to SingPass.
But that's the irony, that as you become more digital, you need even more the human touch as well from,
Yes,
in this particular case, the digital ambassadors.
Absolutely. So we've been lucky that even before the crisis, we've had volunteers, and you really need, this really needs hand-holding. Not sitting opposite each other, but sitting beside the person saying, look, this is the service, you can access, whether it's your CPF balance, your bank balance, or whatever services or forms you want to apply. This is how you do it on your phone. This is your SingPass. This is how you authenticate. It has been challenging. I think it has been very helpful in ensuring that we really, truly leave no one behind.
In terms of talent as well, and you alluded to that earlier, the government now, and especially the Singapore government, has over the years, as you said, brought back talent and is now a source of talent in developing the kind of applications that citizens want. How would you describe a perfect balance between government and its access to talent, making sure that there's still enough out there in the private sector? And especially now, I would imagine with COVID-19, the government has had to accelerate so much of its initiatives that I wonder whether there's a risk in sucking up too much talent from the private sector as well. Is there a balance that you think needs to be found in a smart nation?
First of all, there's a global shortage of talent. And in fact, even if you look at Singaporeans, I can tell you we have hundreds of Singaporeans scattered in Silicon Valley, in Southeast Asia, in China. So the first point is that actually Singapore and Singaporeans have talent, but we have been disseminated, distributed all over the world. So the first thing is, wherever possible, bring our people back home, first source. The second source is grow our own people. And I'm glad to say in the last 5-6 years, I think both in terms of our university, polytechnic intake of Infocom professionals has trebled, in fact. And the quality of people choosing to go into software engineering, ICT, has also gone up quite disproportionately. But even that is still not enough. So the third element has been carefully and judiciously to complement our own local workforce by bringing in people from overseas who are truly have the skills that we need, who complement us, who have the networks, who have that extra ideas and verve to help us with the startup scenes in order to grow a bigger ecosystem which is competitive. Your specific question is government taking too much of the local talent? And I would say my approach has been, when I meet a Singaporean overseas, my first pitch to them is there are lots of opportunities in Singapore for you to do meaningful work. I hope you will consider the government, you will consider the local companies, and you will consider the multinational digital companies. And all the tech giants are here, and in fact, it's no secret, more and more of them are coming here. And in fact, this year has been a potentially bumper year for our ability to attract even more investments, more companies, big and small, to Singapore, because they've realized this is a hyper-connected place. This is a very logical, engineering, oriented society. And importantly, during a crisis, we didn't panic. We dealt with the problems openly, efficiently, and effectively. So in a sense, this actually presents us a second wind of opportunity and of increasing talent. Specifically on government side, we need to have enough talent to help us envision and create the infrastructure, hardware, software, rules. We need to be able to generate some of our own apps, but not all. We need to be able to be familiar enough with the technology so that even when we outsource in a smart way. And then you will realize that a lot of the stuff that we're doing is open source. And we in fact want the private sector to take the ideas and the services here, license it to them either for free or for very minimal rates, and let them run with it. I'll give you an example. We needed to screen people for temperature, safe entry. And GovTech came up with the software, and we've made this platform technology available to the private sector so that they will develop the machines or the services which will ride on it. So I see very much a complementary role between what the government engineers are doing and the opportunities for the private sector. And that's, I think, healthy and will put us in good stead for the future.
As I start looking a little bit more into the future as well, since we are getting in that direction, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has mentioned recently and he's warned of a disease X, that it's not COVID-19, that
Yes.
there is still something in the horizon.
Yes.
If you picture that and you picture how we've developed as a smart nation, how would an ideal smart nation deal with something like a disease X? Both government, people, and the private sector, what would the ecosystem look like?
If you think about the 1918 flu, the mortality rate was far higher than what we are experiencing with COVID-19. And yet, COVID-19 has brought the world almost to a halt. My point is that we must prepare for a future where a new infection is as contagious as COVID-19, but as lethal as the flu of 1918. With that in mind, what it means is that everything that we're facing now, the adjustments that we are making, the way that we are applying technology and the way we are restructuring even our workforce and our work habits, this is a dress rehearsal. This is not the National Day parade, this is the preview parade. So that makes it all the more vital that we learn the right lessons and we prepare ourselves for the future. I say that because I want to emphasize that we're not going to go back to the old normal. It's not possible. And if we did, or if we tried, it would be dangerous. So we must envisage a new normal. A new normal where we're not paralyzed by fear and confined at home or unable to work, but a new normal where we can do all the things that we need to do. And I don't mean just to survive, but to thrive and to grow and to expand our economy, our society, and make it more vibrant, but do so with all these precautions.
And it has been a successful dress rehearsal, you think, so far?
We are not yet past the halfway point of COVID-19. So I dare not declare success yet, but I would say, with the benefit now of the last 9-10 months, I think Singapore has done reasonably well. Not perfect, and the Prime Minister himself has enumerated some areas where we could have done things differently or better. But I would say on the whole, we are doing reasonably well. But always remember, this is not the big one.
Mr. Balakrishnan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Innovation in the post-pandemic world. And joining us from Munich for this discussion is Dr. Thomas Becker. He's Head of Sustainability and Mobility at BMW Group. And here with me in Singapore, to my left, Mr. Simon Kahn. He is Chief Marketing Officer, Google Asia Pacific. And also we have with us Mr. James Chang. He's Chief Executive Officer at Lazada Singapore. Gentlemen, welcome. Thomas, I'd like to begin this discussion by turning to you, because if any company has proven its ability to negotiate a crisis and to go through a tough time and actually face a modern challenge like COVID-19, it is arguably BMW. This global pandemic is going to reshape business for a very long time to come. It has impacted so very many. Why does innovation matter now more than ever?
There were many incidents where a crisis coincided with big steps of innovation that took us forward at the end of the day. So if you look back to the 1950s, our company was almost bankrupt and on the brink of being taken over by Daimler, actually. But that was the point where we decided to launch a completely new series of products, which then took us to where the brand is today. And if you look back at the financial crisis, that was exactly the time when we took the decision to go fully into electric mobility and to launch our first products, the BMW i3, which is also available in Singapore. So if you look at where we are today, I think it's three factors which will really matter how we go through this crisis and out of this crisis. And the first one is obviously about flexibility. I mean, it has really been a big challenge to adjust shifts, to interrupt production, to resume production. We really had to take new approaches, innovative ways of interacting with our customers, replacing the regular showroom visit and test drive. So that was all about being more flexible than we ever thought we would have to be under those conditions. But another factor which I think is hugely important is also reliability. To be reliable as a stakeholder, as an employer, to be a reliable partner of our suppliers and our dealers, I think has been crucial. And finally, I think this situation is also about investment. We just decided this July to undertake huge steps investing into decarbonizing parts of our value chain, in producing in a CO2 neutral manner and to bring down our CO2 footprint.
Certainly flexibility is one that many companies have had to negotiate since the start of this pandemic. Simon, let me turn to you now, because you too have led your teams, many teams, through other crises in the past as well, 9/11, the 07-08 crisis as well. The scale of this COVID-19 pandemic, though, it is unlike anything we've seen before. So what changes that you had to do to cope with this?
It started out as an acute crisis, and it's become something that's a chronic situation that we all have to deal with. So I think as a leader and within the company, we had to really focus first on the well-being of our employees and to help them get best situated to work in a flexible manner from their homes and from other places in order to then serve our customers. One of our biggest priorities going through this has been to make sure that we provide great, reliable information during the time of crisis. So we shifted to working with national governments, with health authorities to provide accurate information about what was happening with COVID-19. But we've also done things like put on our Google Maps food and night shelters in places like India, where you had migrant workers who were leaving cities during the lockdowns in order to provide that help. And shifting also with small businesses our trainings to make sure that they were online and they were accessible for small businesses. And I think finally, with regard to education, we're now supporting approximately 50 million students across Asia by providing them access to our tools.
Right. So education has been an important one as well.
And that was an interesting pivot for us.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily something we would have focused on in our plans for 2020, but we really dialed that up as we went into the crisis.
James, let's bring you in on the conversation here, because as an e-commerce company, I mean, you'll know this very well, tech is at the heart of what Lazada does. And KPMG's latest survey on what is on the minds of business leaders like yourselves included questions related to this pandemic. Business leaders overwhelmingly were saying, look, we need to move more into the management of technology here. We need to accelerate just how fast we digitalize. So tell us what the future is for us and for our engagement with this digital world. Is it just going to stay this way? Because you've had to do lots of innovation too.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at what happened in the peak of the circuit breaking measures here in Singapore, we had more than half of Singapore visiting our app for likes of Redmart to do online groceries and also to buy everyday needs. But not only that, many of the SMEs needed to continue to sell the products given that their offline store was closed. Give example, on Redmart, we had to make some tough choices. And basically the choices were, given the inflow of the demand, we had run out of capacity and delivery slots. Then the choices were, do we serve more customers Do we limit what they buy? Do we limit the frequency that they buy? These are some of the things that many of the companies are thinking about, how to better utilize the technology to catch up with the changing needs and the changing demand. Because it's actually faster to use technology to adapt in a very urgent situation than to change a physical operation model.
This role of digitalization, though, I mean, I see it as being sort of, going hand in hand with the speed of recovery that companies make. What impact is it going to have on just how fast companies can sort of move past the worst of this pandemic, Simon?
Sure. I think that what companies need to do is not just adapt to digital technology or this new phase, but really to embrace it. This is an opportunity for companies to insert into their systems, integrate into their systems and their processes, digital tools and processes. And the companies that really do that are the ones that will recover most quickly, and I think will really set themselves up for the future with a really strong foundation.
And that's even with the fact that this situation is constantly moving. I mean, James, how do you plan for innovation when we're not quite over the pandemic yet?
We're looking at what's going to happen in the next 3 months and 6 months. Because one thing for sure, the whole digitization is not a new thing. It has always been there. It's just that what COVID-19 and this kind of crisis have done is expedited that. And from that, we've seen a lot of changes. So you talk about innovation. One of the key things that we see a difference in many of the companies and partners that we work with is that in the past, digitization and digital strategy has always been forefront of many companies' mindset. However, when you look at the resources company put in terms of people, dollar, investment in technology, has been lacking compared to the aspiration. And what this situation has done is recalibrate the resource allocation and the planning side. So we think it's going to be much more exciting new services, new products going to come out because of the change in the resources and the budgeting side of many of the larger organizations.
Right. Thomas, let's bring you back in on the conversation here. What this pandemic has done is really forced us to sort of learn to take an idea, get it implemented as quickly as possible, insofar as innovation is concerned. What's the role of the corporate culture in supporting this commitment to innovation? How do you do it at BMW?
Well, I think we keep constantly seek to be staying on the move. And if you take the example of our organization in Singapore, what COVID brought about was obviously the need to rethink the customer interface. So while we already had, I think, a reasonably well-designed web presence for the BMW product, the COVID crisis actually motivated us to seek to get as close as possible to the idea of a real digital showroom. Also, the idea of having doorstep test drives instead of the regular way of testing a car was surely not brought about in the first place by COVID, but hugely accelerated. And finally, also the need for many people, or the idea of, well, I want to use a car, but not necessarily own it, has gained additional attraction, I think. And we are just in the process of ramping up subscription-based models, which will complement selling and leasing, and where we see already, I think, quite positive response from our customer base, namely in your country.
Simon, let me begin by asking you this question about creativity, because you've said that it can thrive in constraint, and I can't think of times that constrain us more than this COVID-19 pandemic. You've also said that an agile team can adapt to new challenges. So under the conditions that we presently find ourselves in, most business leaders, do they need to be prepared to act on this, what you'd called imperfect information? It might seem almost counterintuitive for leaders to do that.
One of the key elements for a leader in a crisis is to be able to acknowledge that to the team and to share with the team his or her kind of vision and set the direction for where the organization is going to go. And then start to provide structure and autonomy for that team to be able to operate within that environment. So we've done a lot of pivoting because you have to be agile and you have to really look at the circumstances on the ground and then provide good opportunities to to serve your customers. An example is we have a series of events that we call Google for events. Google for India, Google for Indonesia. And we did the first ever Google for India event that was completely virtual because of necessity. And we found that it actually worked quite well. We got huge amounts of engagement, and a lot of people really enjoyed. And we took cues from television, right? We have to really now produce shows rather than do in-person events. And I think in the future, what that will let us do is think about how do we do more of a hybrid approach, where you have some elements of the event that happen in person, but you have more elements that are also produced as part of the show.
And you believe we're going to see more of that then?
Absolutely. I think there's always been a need for sort of in-person connection, and there's a desire for that, and that will come back. But digital transformation is here to stay, and a lot of that will be interspersed within these types of events.
So, just picking up on what Simon was talking about there, James, this reaching out to the region. I mean, Lazada, you've got a presence all across the region. Has engagement changed, and will it change in terms of how you innovate going forward?
Actually, what happened was that during this time, many companies were thinking, how can we do things differently? And when different companies do that, it actually fostered a lot of collaborations and partnerships that normally didn't seem quite obvious. So one of the examples of that was we had a tremendous increase in the brands who needed to showcase their products, and live stream became a big hit. But we need a studio capacity. We need lighting. We need all the technologies to set up. And Zouk, which is a nightclub here in Singapore, had all the lighting, the runways, the bars, the kitchen. So we actually converted Zouk into a live streaming studio. And this sort of partnership was phenomenal. And we do believe that this is going to be a lasting partnership. The other example of this is partnership with MediaCorp. So during the National Day, the previous Singapore National Day, MediaCorp was hosting and showcasing the parade on digital and through the TV. And we partnered together to create that additional level of excitement by converting to a big shopping event. But not only it's an excitement, it helped a lot of the SMEs to be able to use that as a vehicle through this partnership to be able to continue their daily livelihood. And this sort of partnership is definitely here to stay.
Thomas, I want you to make a comment on that, because I know that BMW has been very big into collaboration. You do it intensively there. You've got public and private entities across different sectors of industries collaborating. How much more important is collaboration going to be in this innovation process as companies begin to think about these new ideas and these new ways of working?
Well, I mean, there are two dimensions, I think, that actually impact our industry big deal. One is the fact that if you look at what is shaping customer demand, in the old days, this was national legislation, European law, US law. But now the role of municipalities is much bigger. So if you look at the uptake of electric vehicles, for example, like those that you see here, a lot depends on the availability of public infrastructure, which is actually being decided upon by city councils. So that is just one example where we need to be much more flexible, where we also need to engage stakeholder groups that are important in a different manner, because you just can't travel to every place at the moment. One example what that means is in totally different perspective. We are putting a strong focus on a sustainable supply chain, meaning taking care of critical raw materials, meaning to seek to have as much renewable energy in the footprint, for example, of our aluminum production. And when we reached out to the relevant stakeholder communities 2 weeks ago, we couldn't do that by physical meetings. So we had 2 days where we started in the Americas in the evening, continued in Asia in the morning, and then had the European stakeholders around lunchtime.
Thomas, you mentioned the wonderful vehicles that are surrounding us here in Singapore. You have a 2030 goal for net zero emissions and so on. What does it mean for your strategic direction going forward?
We set ourselves the targets to be CO2 neutral with our production processes by next year. So if you want to claim that you are in compliance with the Paris Agreement, you need to take care, obviously, of what happens in the hands of the customer. And this is about emission-free driving, ideally with renewable energies. The other big piece, which is going to become even more relevant, is the supply chain. So just to give you an example, before we even start to put a car together, you have already 10 tons of CO2 in the supply chain. That is 3 to 4 years of driving. So if you want to bring that down, you need to talk and be partnering with the aluminum people, with the steel people, with the plastic guys. And namely, if we talk about electric cars, with those people who do the energy storage devices, the batteries, which would otherwise drive up the footprint of our products hugely. So it's really about engaging the complete network in order to be successful in bringing down the footprint of our final product. And this is quite a challenge, but we are approaching that with also encouraging response from many of our partners.
So sustainability is going to be one of the key things we have to think about going forward, and business leaders also have to think about those supply chains, how they've been disrupted. Simon, data as well. This is a big one. You're looking at how behaviors are changing. Are we underutilizing it in a certain way? Is it going to become even more important to maximize how we use it?
I think data has always been critical, and I think it will become more and more important. One of the things that we're really focused on is working with our partners, with small businesses, with large partners, to help them get the right data so that they can make decisions. And that's particularly important as many companies are going through this transformation. So we have tools like Market Finder, which helps small businesses find the next markets for them. So they use our Google information to see where they might be best positioned to export. Or retail trends, and we've just introduced this in Australia and Japan to help retailers understand what are the new things that are coming up that they might be able to react to.
And is that the same with Lazada? I mean, are you beginning to look at the amount of information that you've gathered? Because you've seen how customers' behavior has changed as well. How are you using data differently? How do you think that how will pan out?
Well, I mean, we have been a very data-driven decision-making company. But as Simon mentioned, one of the key change that we see is actually even SMEs and some of the traditional businesses that normally, even though they had access to the customer and sales data, weren't really making a lot of strategic decisions based on it. Given what's going on, have spent more time understanding the data. And this level of kind of proficiency of converting the data into sales and business activity is uplifted the overall economy's aptitude and ability to better make sense of data. And I think that's going to have a profound change.
Lazada was once a small startup of its own. You're vulnerable when you first start up. For those that are still going, not just surviving, but they want to thrive, as we say, what should business leaders be keeping front and center right now in terms of how they strategize moving forward?
I would say for small businesses, this is the best time to make investment of what they think is going to come in the future, in the next 4 to 6 months. So for example, Lazada, we have not only taken initiative to onboard a lot of F&Bs and also hotels, attractions during this time, because staycation is going to be a trend as we go into holiday season. But we're actually seriously thinking about expanding our business and offerings in a travel space, because we believe that's also going to be a space that's going to open up. And so making those investments now, knowing that it's going to come, we believe it's the right thing to do.
I think that these points are exactly right. One of the key elements for small businesses, for any business really, is to have the right people. And I think that's one of the things that we've been hearing from our partners, which is we don't have enough people who are well trained with digital skills. And so in addition to adopting digital tools and being able to be more proficient in it, finding those people or upskilling the small business owners, I think that's a key element that will help them succeed as they move forward.
We live in extraordinary times. Thomas, thank you very much. Simon and James, thank you for your participation in this discussion today.